Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Water Guy Show with Paul, your Connecticut water guy.
And Ethan, your local audio guy.
Together, we're going to talk about all things water. But all seriousness, we're going to be talking specifically about some cool stuff today that hopefully we will give you some nuggets of information and hopefully be able to better your lives by education and awareness and some options to do things differently in the future. And I am Paul with Connecticut Advanced Water Systems here in Richmond, Virginia. Our office is located over by the Richmond Airport in Highland Springs. Some folks call it Henrico, depending on who the mailman is that day.
Yeah.
But, we are local, and Advanced Water Systems is a dealer of the Connecticut products, and our dealership actually has over 12 offices, spanning Virginia down into the Carolinas, down into Georgia, and one office out in Denver.
So you got them out in the Rockies then.
That's it, from the mountains to the sea. That's we cover a lot, and we officially ended last year as the number one largest dealership of Connecticut in the entire world. So,
that's awesome.
Heck of an accomplishment, and not just are we the biggest, but we are the best with our satisfaction levels and customer loyalty. So, once folks trust us with their water, we're family. We're there for life.
Absolutely.
Anyway. You can reach us, just to get all the small talk out of the way. You can reach us at 877-60-WATER. That's our phone number over there, 609-2837 if you don't have one of those phones that you can spell and dial. Or you could go to our website at connecticutrichmond.com. And the hardest part about all that is spelling Connecticut. So it's like kinetic energy with an O on the end instead of an ick. So, anyway, at KINETICO Richmond, like the city.com. And we have the YouTube channel by the same name, Connecticut Richmond. And if you are just tuning in, we try to keep, this isn't the normal chit-chat type show. Mm-hmm. We try to keep things unique. And if you hear something that we said before, it's probably a replay of a previous episode, because we try to make them all pretty unique ones. And if you just tuned in and you're curious about some of our other 16 prior episodes, you can catch our Water Guy podcast on all the platforms. So you can go back and listen to them all. And if you have an extra 57 minutes to kill without commercials, you can listen to them without a break nonstop.
So you're telling me that I can not only listen to your voice at 10 a.m. on Saturday, but I can also listen to you anytime I want on Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere you can get a podcast?
Anytime you want.
I like that.
It's kind of weird. Sometimes I find myself listening to my own podcast, and my wife will come home and just give me that look like, you've lost your mind.
It's such a good podcast, though.
It is.
It's so good.
I want to make sure, it's one of those things I self-critique, so I want to listen and find out if there's something that I do or say on the radio that I don't realize. Right. We had this one guy with my prior life that said like every 3 words.
Oh, he had some filler word problems?
Yeah, some filler word problems. If that's the official technical name, then that's exactly what it was. But I try to minimize those. So.
Right, of course.
So anyway, that's a little intro here. We just we're going into the weekend after the Super Bowl. I didn't even watch the Super Bowl. I hate to admit. I had a million other things going on.
I heard Taylor Swift's boyfriend's team won the Super Bowl this year.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
I heard more women were watching the Super Bowl for Taylor Swift than for the actual game.
I will say, and this is, I apologize for derailing, but apparently I was reading in the news that it's making connections with daughters and fathers, because
isn't that sweet?
Yeah, like football dads, their daughters want to talk about football because Taylor Swift is involved in it now. So
I wouldn't have even guessed, but that makes sense.
It's very wholesome.
Hey, but I'm all for a good, strong family unit, taking care of those relationships that are important for for formative years and beyond.
Absolutely.
So anyway, it's kind of funny because today's episode is, I'm going to call this one Super Bowl Bad, Virginia Style.
Super Bowl Bad.
So
Virginia Style. What makes it Virginia Style?
Well, it's Virginia Style because the content for today is all going to be revolving around PFAS.
I recognize that word.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, and PFAS, it's been around. It's a chemical it's a man-made chemical, and it was basically invented back in the 40s. And we covered more detail on a previous episode. Hint, hint for those folks that want to brush up on their PFAS knowledge. But so we won't repeat a lot of that information here. Just some good juicy tidbits. But the reason I call this Virginia Style is that our office is located actually in Henrico County, and Henrico County is a really weird shaped county if you ever see it on the map.
Yes. Also a very big county too.
Yeah, it's big, it's spread out, and it's kind of like a puzzle piece.
Yeah.
Like it's missing a big chunk in the middle. I'm sure there's an odd story to that is completely non-water related. But anyway, our office is located in the eastern part of Henrico, and I actually live in the western part of Henrico, so I get a chance to commute through pretty much the whole county.
That's nice.
On a daily basis. So
nice.
Very, very pretty county. I love their signs. They have, looks like real gold on the letters.
Oh yeah.
It's probably not real gold. It could be based on taxes, but that's a whole nother show. So basically, PFAS it's a really nasty thing that was man-made, and it goes all the way back when I believe the tagline was "Life's better with chemicals or with chemistry." That was way back when they were trying to, back in the days when you had cast iron cookware and your dishes, you had real dishes and metal forks and things like that. You didn't have anything that was disposable. You didn't have Teflon or non-stick pans. And that was just a game changer when it first came out. But basically, PFAS were the building blocks for Teflon and non-stick stuff. But they're also in a whole bunch of other things that we find in our daily lives. And so they haven't gone away. They've actually grown in their presence. But the PFAS, they're not our friend. They're also nicknamed the forever chemicals, because once they've been created, they literally don't break down almost forever.
Just kind of loiter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they, unlike a lot of the other, like plastics, you see plastics out there and people are like, oh, plastics will be around forever. Well, even plastics, if you leave them in the sun long enough, they'll break down into little pieces.
Start to decay.
Yeah, well, this stuff takes hundreds of thousands of years to decay. That's way longer than we're going to be around. So it's one of those self-made problems that we've created that we're going to be living with for a very long time.
Yeah.
So basically, the PFAS, there's kind of some maximum contamination levels that are put out there that you want to. The EPA tries to help us by putting some parameters on what we should consider to be safe exposure, and up until currently, I actually heard that they flip-flopped, and they had changed or released this thing, a new one. And it was up for less than a day, and it was pulled down. So I'm going to dig up more on that for a future episode here.
Please do.
But what we know for sure is that the current maximum contaminant level on PFAS, and that's PFAS, PFOA. There's two specific ones, and it's 70 parts per trillion. So that's really friggin' small.
Yeah.
They are proposing right now that the limit be dropped from 70 to 4. So the 70 isn't even close to what they think we really want to stay away from.
Right.
And the 4 that's the one they're trying to really get past right now. And I like to put things into perspective where you can kind of visualize them, especially this being radio. I can't show you anything, but this will help. 4 parts per trillion. If you can imagine a liter of water, you know, if there in that liter of water, if you have 4 billionths of a gram. Now a gram is so tiny.
Yeah.
Now you got to remember 4 billionths of that. That is what their proposed new limit is going to be. So pretty much you don't want this stuff anywhere around you if you can avoid it.
Right.
But anyway, there was Henrique. So this whole story really is going to center around the RIC, the Richmond International Airport. And that's why I call it, it's Virginia style, because we're going to keep this one local and close to home, because this is a radio show. People listen to this that are actually local. So they discovered on August 23 of 2023, as best I can get the date pinned down. So not even a year ago, they discovered that there were PFAS in the Chickahominy River and the White Oak Swamp. So the Chickahominy River is actually downstream, so it doesn't impact Henrico. It's bad news for everybody that gets their water out of the Chickahominy River and decides they want to eat fish out of that. But the White Oak Swamp is one of those things that's really close to the Richmond Airport. And it'll all make sense by the end of our episode here. But they basically discovered that there was PFAS out there. And they were like, oh, okay, well, we need to go ahead and do some testing on this stuff and find out how bad this really is. So there was 6 months of testing that went on. And it actually, so 6 months, actually, the 6 months of testing concluded around August of actually, it was towards the end of the first year. So this was a news release that actually came out August 23rd. And kind of going back in my head, I know what happened before that, because we actually got called in for some of the contamination around middle of the year. So this my timing is a little bit late, but it was all this happened in 2023. So beginning of the year, they started doing testing. By the middle of the year, they knew that they had some real situations going on. They did 6 months of testing on private wells, and dozens of these wells had detectable levels. And one of them had levels. Now, remember, the current limit is 70. There's one well that had over 1,100. So it was way, way, way over. So the real, the numbers that they actually tested was 259 wells got tested. And 30 of those had contamination. And 2 of those were over the 70 number, with one of them being just stupid high. So they found out that, yes, this is a real problem. And that kind of opened up the whole box, because it's been there for quite some time. And now they're trying to go through and figure out, how big is this problem and where could it really originate from? And is there any way to get your arms around this? But like I said, it's a bad thing. And the new proposal is 4 parts per trillion. And then what they are also going to propose, there's some related stuff out there that's almost the same thing. PFNAs, PFHXSs, PFBS, and Gen Xs are going to have a hazard index. So they're kind of like PFAS, but they've got some characteristics that make them very unique, so that each one of them may have its own max. So more things to stay the heck away from if you can at all avoid it. They're coming out with what they call an MCLG, which is a maximum contaminant level goal, and their goal is 0. They just flat out said, you don't want any of this stuff.
It's a pretty ambitious goal.
Yeah. Okay. Now here's the cool part about this.
Yeah.
Cool for some people, is that these numbers and limits are only going to apply to public waterworks. So that means that, and this is EPA stuff at this point. So that basically means that if you're getting your water from a public source like Henrico County or City of Richmond, something like that, then they're going to have to abide by these new limits. But remember, there was 259 wells that were tested. None of those wells fall underneath a public waterworks. Actually, it's kind of interesting because wells don't fall under any EPA. There's nothing that the EPA can do or say to a private well. So everybody that has their own well is on their own to do their own thing. And it's kind of scary because a lot of folks think, and we hear it all the time, they think that just because their water comes from a well that it must be great. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that this episode is going to let everybody know that is far from the case.
Right. And I mean, that one that one conversation we had in the one episode about landfill juice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah, that stuff leaks down into your into the ground.
Yes.
And I mean, ground there are wells in the ground. So
yeah,
that stuff can get in your well real quick.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So we had 259 wells that were tested in Henrico County. This is going to put this in perspective real quick. There was some data that we pulled up. Henrico County has over 15,000 wells, and they only tested 259 of them. That's a teeny tiny percentage.
Yeah.
And I know we're actually coming up on our first break here, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with more of the Water Guy Show. If you're looking for something to do for the next few seconds, you can look us up at ConnecticutRichmond.com, or you can find the podcast and save it for cue it up after this at Water Guy Podcast.
But don't do that while driving.
Don't do it while driving. Yeah, if you're driving, that is bad. And we'll see you in a couple seconds. And welcome back to the next section of the Water Guy Show.
Water Guy Show.
This is Paul with I'm your Connecticut Water Guy, and I guess the break was too long, so got to get back in the hot seat here. We're gonna
hopefully they looked up the website,
yes,
or the podcast,
Connecticut Richmond or Water Guy Podcast.
Only if you weren't driving, though. If you did it while driving.
Only if you were at home. Yeah. At home, or you could drive if you're the passenger.
True.
Then you really wouldn't be a driver unless you're a Tesla.
Some people also work on Saturdays.
Oh.
So at work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
either way, you can look us up, or you can call us at 877-60-WATER. We're not open during the weekends, but we do have 24/7 real people answering the phone.
Yes.
So I don't ever like getting sent over to an answering machine. That just is one of those pet peeves of mine. So I make sure that we've always got a real person.
It's not a Paul thing.
Could be 2 a.m. You can get a real person. Won't be one of our normal people until we get a chance to respond. Which, if it's an emergency, we do respond. But if it's just somebody that has a glass of wine at 2 a.m. and wants to chit chat, we've got people for you.
Hey, that's perfect.
So
where did we leave off last?
So before the break, we left off that Henrico County here in all around Richmond, Virginia. It's a really odd puzzle piece of a county. They found out that actually, the correction on my dates from earlier here, it was actually late in 2022 that they first found out about PFAS.
Gotcha.
And that'll all make sense in a second. But they did a lot of testing, and they tested 259 wells, and 30 of them had contamination. So it was more than 10% of these wells that had some level of contamination of this PFAS stuff, just nasty forever chemicals. And that's a lot. to test 259 wells, when we do these tests, and we can do them, but they're about $600 each. So the county spent an enormous amount of money to go ahead and try to figure out, getting their arms around this problem. And that's good, but it leaves a lot of folks untested. So I was looking at a quantity of wells in different areas around Richmond, and just in Henrico alone, there's well over 15,000 total wells. So 259 doesn't even really scratch the surface.
Mm-mm.
And if you didn't get tested, you better assume that you have it.
Yeah.
Because that's the only safe way to move forward. And just because I know this radio audience has some other areas, Goochland also has over 15,000 wells. Powhatan has over 25,000 wells.
It's a lot of wells.
And there's in every other county, if you look at it county by county, there is at least 5,000 in each county. So, yeah, it's there's lots of wells out there that have not been tested.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that they knew about this, and we're doing this actually late 2022, maybe really early into 23, because we actually got reached out to, and in the beginning of 2023, and on a couple of these wells, and we're brought in to actually start to put something in place to help treat these folks. And I can't obviously talk about specifics on there, but that was back in January of 2023 that we put one of the first ones in that we knew about, and we've had a few since then. So the problem is continuous, and as they are finding more and more, they're realizing how big of an issue this really is. But the title, Our Super Bowl Bad, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about that, because it does make sense. The first few projects that we worked on that we brought in there we were brought in to help protect these folks. They were what's considered shallow wells. And shallow wells are kind of, as the name implies, they're a lot of people call them bored wells.
Mm-hmm.
On the western, well, we'll talk about more of that in a minute though, but basically they've all been shallow. So they haven't tapped into any really deep aquifers. And you would almost expect that, because the airport contaminated the White Oak Swamp. And the swamp obviously is just a big old body of water, and over, decades, any contamination that gets into it is going to spread around and kind of get to the whole area and get down into the surface waters. So we were dealing with all wells that were directly impacted from the White Oak Swamp. And then the latest one, a couple weeks ago actually, it was a 300-foot well. And at first you're like, oh, that's exactly one football field straight down in the ground.
Wow.
So that's why today's name is Super Bowl Bad.
There's the connection.
Yep.
I like that.
So it's Super Bowl Bad because it's a football field straight down in the ground into that aquifer, and that one was really bad. So it takes a lot to shock me now. I've been doing this for about 9 years.
Mm.
And I walked out of there and I just sat in the truck and I said, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is really, really bad, because it's bad because now we're into a deep aquifer.
Right.
And that deep aquifer travels for sometimes hundreds and thousands of miles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're not talking about just a very, a pinprick down in there and your backyard is the entire aquifer. You're talking about aquifers they're like underground creeks, so to speak.
Now, real quick, for those that do not know, and admittedly me as well, what exactly is an aquifer?
So an aquifer it's where water is underground.
Okay.
It's bodies of water. And it's funny you ask, because Henrico has there's a map. let's see. Henrico it's a really spread out weird shape, and in the western part of Henrico, primarily they have consolidated rock, and in the east they have what's called unconsolidated sediments. So if you're in the western side of Henrico, basically what that means is that you've got an aquifer, which is just water underground, that is around granite bedrock cracks and decomposed granite that's above the bedrock. So it's like that bedrock layer. That's where, if you're doing a bored well, which is like, it's a 3-foot diameter hole in the ground. If you drive around in the country, you'll probably, if you peek in people's yards, you'll probably see these concrete things sticking up with a lid on it. Yeah, some of them are sewer systems, that's a whole another kind of water. But almost every one of those is a shallow well or a bored well. They basically drill this like a big post hole digger. They just bore out a big fat hole and they drop some concrete rings down in there, and that's what their water comes out of. And those are very, very well. Yeah, if it's shallow, it's very prone to getting contaminated from surface waters and soil contamination and stuff like that. So the granite bedrock one, that's a little bit different composition, and the water moves around in those pretty freely through those cracks in the rocks.
Gotcha.
And then you get over on the east side to the unconsolidated sediments, and then you end up with pretty much sand, silt, and clay in most of that soil. So that stuff means that pretty much you're dealing with, there's an aquifer that sits on top of the green clay, they call it. And you're going to basically drill down, if you're in one of these shallower wells, right down to that green clay, and then you're going to let the water kind of percolate through all this sand, silt, and clay into this 3-foot hole, and then you pull it out with a pump. And they are also very prone to surface contamination. But the other thing about them is, years ago, if you've been around here for a while, when we have droughts, you may have heard about a few people that their wells ran dry. So especially when you have a whole neighborhood in there, if the whole neighborhood was on shallow wells like that, there's not a lot of water, especially when you have a whole bunch of houses pumping out of it pretty much at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, it's not good. There was a lot of old school where this was the primary way of doing things, but they don't really do that hardly at all anymore. There are some special cases, and there's some well drillers that are still doing those because in some instances there's really no other option. I've seen deep wells producing, they call them low yield wells, where you're in there and literally you must be so tight in the rock that you're just not getting any water. So it's kind of like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't type thing, where you're either going to get surface water, but it could dry up in a drought, or you've got deep water that's pretty consistent coming in, but you may be limited to less than, like, we've actually got some systems out there. They're harvesters, actually. That's what we call them, because some of these wells can only produce, some of them down to 0.1 gallons a minute. So it takes 10 minutes to get a gallon of water. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And, most people, when they take a shower, if you take a 10-minute shower and you've got a flow restrictor in there, you might be using 2 gallons a minute. So a 10-minute shower is 20 gallons. So it would take you 200 minutes to be able to pull that out of the well. So that's when we have to literally take 200 minutes and we slowly pull water up out of these low yield situations, and we put them in holding tanks so that basically when you need it, it's there, but we harvest the water in a very, very slow rate so that you can use pretty much you can use just about anything. We pride ourselves in having equipment that can handle just about anything you run into. I think I've only had 2 situations in the last 9 years that we just couldn't help. And both of those were issues of extreme salinity.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's pockets of salt water down there that you get into one of those, and we had one that we actually limped through for a couple of years, but it progressively got saltier and saltier. It was bad. It finally to the point where I was like, look, you don't really have an option. We either have to put a system in there like a cruise ship would have that's going to extract pure water out of seawater.
Right.
Or you just need to drill another well. And he did another well and got lucky with that one, but it was a different depth.
Right.
So
I'm never going to forget when you showed me that photo of an old unit and like the internal mechanisms were like spotless.
Yeah. Yeah, our Connecticut stuff, you're talking about the main control area, because the Connecticut brings in the water, and the very first thing that happens is it sends it down for treatment. And then once the water gets treated, then it comes on up and it's allowed to touch all of the control parts. So, yeah, I had that one picture that I showed you. It was like a 12-year-old valve on some pretty nasty iron water. And the inlet was all nasty because you don't control the inlet. But, everything else looked like it had just rolled off of off the line up in Ohio where they're made. Yeah. So, yeah, good memory on that one.
And he has a photo of it, so if you meet this guy and ask him about it, he can show you that photo. Yeah, I promise.
Or you call us. Call us at the 877-60-WATER, and we will actually text it to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
We have the capability to do that.
Perfect.
So anyway, back to this PFAS thing.
Yeah.
So the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, says that across the whole nation, at least 45% of the nation's tap water has PFAS. And that's scary. We covered this on the previous episode, but there's over 12,000 types of PFAS. And not all of them can even be tested for or detected yet. So the USGS actually only tested for 32 of these things, and that's where they extrapolated at least 45%. So that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
So in 2020, the Virginia Department of Health Office of Drinking Water did some studies and found some level of contamination in 15 out of 45 major public water systems here in Virginia. So about a third of them. And 11 of those were over the EPA levels. So 11 of them were bad enough to be red flagged. And then, so new studies are underway, and they are now going out there and they're looking at I think it's up to 400 smaller public systems. So they looked at these at 45 of the major big ones, and now they're going for 400 of the smaller ones. And to put that in perspective, in Virginia, this actually was a number that really surprised me. There's over 2,800 public water systems in Virginia. That just seems like a huge number of public water systems.
That is a very large number.
Yeah, I didn't expect to see that. But then again, you start looking at numbers of in Henrico and Goochland and Powhatan by themselves, you've got well over 60,000 wells.
Right.
So those are just 3 counties. I can't even imagine. Well, I can now. It's 2,800. But I know we're coming up to our next break, but I wanted to throw out there that the EPA recently found contamination in Colonial Heights, Norfolk, and Langley Air Force Base, among others. So places not just over by the Richmond airport, but out there south and east. Where's Langley?
Nova.
No, yeah, I was going to say that's Nova.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nova. So, yeah, they're all messed up there. But so we'll talk more about that when we get back from the break. Hopefully, we're keeping you riveted to the channel here. So don't go anywhere. ConnecticutRichmond.com for the website and for the YouTube channel, or 877-60-WATER. and we'll see you in a few seconds. And welcome back to the final segment of the Water Guy podcast and radio show.
Yeah, definitely not the last episode, though.
Definitely not the last. This is episode number 17 for those keeping track.
Yeah.
And today we are talking about the Super Bowl bad, Virginia style. And before the break, we talked about how the title to today's show is because we were doing some PFAS projects, and one of them had extreme contamination at 300 feet down at a deep well. So nobody is safe.
Yeah.
And nobody's safe. If you think you're safe because you have a well, think again, because a football field straight down is contaminated.
Yeah.
And it is an underground river. It's a good way to think about it. And it can travel for hundreds or even thousands of miles. And you don't control what's upstream. And we don't really have any impact on downstream, but we can sure make downstream worse. And that's what's happening. So you owe it to yourselves to, if you have a well, the EPA is not going to come in and basically test you mandatorily or save you. And the reason is because there are public waterworks. Those are what the EPA has mandates out there with maximum contaminant levels for. And then there's anybody with a well. And those are considered private waterworks. And they have zero control over those. There's nothing that they can do, no warnings that they're required to give you. It is everybody's own responsibility to find out what's coming out of the ground and take actions that you feel are necessary to protect you and your family. Sounds kind of harsh, but I wanted to just throw that out there. That is the harsh reality.
It's the reality
of a well. You get free water. You don't have a guaranteed great water coming out of the ground. And I feel I can put my head down at night knowing that I am driving awareness that could help save somebody from horrible illnesses.
Absolutely. And all that money that you're saving not having a water bill, you could put that towards a Connecticut system.
That's exactly right.
Uh-huh.
You got to spend the money on something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I see, I see some of the weirdest things. I saw just yesterday, hopefully he's not listening, but we had a customer, didn't buy anything except for the K5 drinking water system. But he doesn't like water, and he told me, he's like, I'll never use it. So I was sitting there trying to figure out, well, why did you get it? And I saw his Keurig, and I'm like, oh, well, you must use it for your coffee. And he's like, no, I don't drink coffee. I have that for guests, and somebody gave me that as a gift. And I'm like, so I don't know what to say to that, but it made me feel good that he didn't even really think that he needed it, but he got it.
He still saw the necessity.
He did. Yeah. He saw the necessity. He wanted his ice to be safe.
Yeah.
He didn't drink water, but he likes ice.
Yeah. I mean, he made it clear that he does have guests.
Yes. Well, I said, that's what you're doing it for. You're doing it for the guests,
right?
If nothing else. And he said, yep, that's pretty much it.
That's very considerate.
But he lives by himself, and he's got a dog that was cutest. I'm not a dog person. Actually, I'm not really a dog or a cat person, but this guy had the coolest dog. It came up to me as soon as I got out of the truck, and it was a little brown dog with a perm.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it, but the dog almost had a smile on its face, and it was kind of like a little. It wasn't like a poodle, but it was I don't know what it was. I sound ignorant trying to describe it, but it looked like it wanted to bark nonstop. This dog, the entire time I was there, you wouldn't have even known it was there. It was like it was mute.
Oh, that's awesome.
I turned to the customer and I said, can the dog bark? And he's like, oh my gosh, that dog will bark its head off if a deer comes in here. But it just blew my mind that this dog didn't bark.
But a stranger, nah.
Yeah, I was a stranger. Didn't
Right.
even yip at me.
Right.
Yeah, but a deer. Yeah, you bet. If you're a deer, watch out. So, so anyway, that was yeah. He knew the value of it, and it was a gorgeous place. Actually, right on the James River, if I remember correctly. And yeah, the James River is downstream from a lot of awful stuff.
We know how dirty the James River water can be.
Yeah, if you fell in the James with your mouth open, you would just.
Eh.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't even know. You could run it for some Listerine and everything else. So folks are probably wondering, well, how did this PFAS, how did this stuff get out there so bad over there by the Richmond airport? And to really be able to explain that, you got to know a little bit of history about the Richmond airport. So Richmond Airport, also known as RIC if you do traveling, was opened back in 1927. So almost 100 years ago. That seems crazy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it's so back in 1947. So it opened up in 27. 20 years after it opened up, the Air National Guard decided to operate over there. And then they pulled out in 2008, but the Army got in there in 1964 and is still there presently from what I'm able to determine. So where I'm going with this is there's been a lot of military presence, and this is a commercial service airport. Obviously, it's not a private airport. You can take a flight in and out of here, and they are proud to be an international airport. So they do a decent amount of flights. So back in the 70s, the FAA required all U.S. commercial service airports to use something called AFFF. We in the industry we call it AFFF. And AFFF is it's aqueous firefighting foam. Okay, that wasn't as hard. I didn't have to look that one up. But it's so it's a very specific firefighting foam. And the FAA requires that they use this foam for their trainings as well as their emergency response efforts. So if there is a plane that has an emergency and there's a threat of a fire, they have to have AFFF, AFFF on hand, and they have to have folks that know how to use it. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So this stuff is the best in terms of being able to put out fires, and especially fires that could have like jet fuel.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So you can't play around with that stuff. So the interesting thing about this, now remember, since the 1970s, now PFAS was invented back in the 40s. So roughly 30 years after the PFAS were invented, this mandate went out there. And the government, if anybody's ever done any work for the government, you know how picky they are on their specifications. So the AFFF, the firefighting foam that they are requiring that be used, all has PFAS still to this day. You would think that they had like banned PFAS altogether, but no, because of the FAA, it is still required in their foam. And of course, you have to train to be able to put out fires. You can't just, give somebody a book and say, all right, if the plane comes in on fire, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. They make them go out there and do practice runs.
Right. Like a volunteer station would do.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You got to practice. Otherwise, if something like that, if you hit it for real and you have no idea exactly, what button to push and how hard,
right?
Reality is much different than a simulation. So there is training now that the RIC knows how bad this stuff is, they haven't actually they won't use AFFF unless there's an actual emergency. So I think they must be doing something where, it must be a very limited training, or they're training with everything except for you pull the hose back and don't release it. Kind of like if you're learning how to shoot a gun, it'd be everything except for actually pulling the trigger.
Right.
so that your reflexes are there, you know how to handle it. But that is why all this PFAS is over there by the airport, because when you're done with it, obviously it's all over the runway, it's everywhere. They're just spraying everything down with foam, and then it's there on the ground. And as we kind of just said, it's a forever chemical. It's not going to just disintegrate and hit the sun and go away. So the next rain that comes in washes it into the ditches, washes it into the creeks, washes it into the White Oak Swamp.
Storm drains.
Everywhere it can go. And basically it went into the swamp, and that's how it's permeated that area really heavily. So it's a continuing problem.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
Newport News Waterworks actually, quote, discovered it in early 2022. But that was in quotes, like air quotes. I forgot to do that. But that's when Henrico really kind of was alerted to the fact that there's some bad stuff going on. But there was some federal reports that were done back in May of 2019 and July of 2020 that never really made it to Henrico. They were more, this is kind of one of those, the federal side of the government didn't really share things with anybody else.
Which is always
imagine that.
Comforting to hear.
Yeah. They didn't really share this information, probably because they knew that this was something terrifying, and they were going to have to be very strategic about what they announce and how much information they release.
Right.
Because they knew how bad this was going to be. But it's, for everybody listening, this is bad. This is something, it's a chemical that is not going away, and it is out there. We've tested, we've proven it, and they are still trying to do studies to determine health impact. But the customer that I was just at with the 300-foot well, this customer has cancer, and the terrible thing is, she says literally everybody in the neighborhood also has cancer. Yeah. When I heard that, I'm just like, oh my, this is far worse than anybody even realized. That's way beyond a coincidence.
Right.
So it's some bad stuff. So everybody needs to get at least something to protect your drinking water. They're still studying it to find out if this stuff can be inhaled or absorbed through the skin significantly. But they do know beyond a shadow of a doubt that drinking water and food and stuff like that, that is absolutely, that's bad. If you ingest it, that's the biggest method of contamination to your own body.
Right.
So, so I was saying that the feds never really shared that information with the county, but it actually goes back even further than that. The National Guard, I remember the Air National Guard was there until 2008. The National Guard Bureau did two separate studies, one in 2015 and one in 2020, that confirmed that PFAS was present.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So multiple things since 2015 have been going on, and it just now trickled down to the point where Henrico got wind of it and decided that, this is something that they need to act on.
Right.
Wow, that was intense. All right. So we were talking about where people are basically living and how many wells there are out there.
I'm pulling that map up.
I got this cool little map.
Nice.
That Stacy in the office pulled up for me today. And it's basically what we're looking at here. It's called the Middle Chickahominy Environmental PFAS Dashboard. Mm-hmm. So if you do some searching online, you'll be able to pull this up and fact check me. But on this, they have some circles, and this map ranges all the way down through kind of Kings Corner, Lenexa, all the way on up to Glen Allen.
Yeah.
And they had all these different test sites, and they were measuring the PFAS contamination in fish tissue, sediment, and water. And the end of the story here is that they color-coded these circles, so it's really easy to it's like a heat map almost. You look at this and you could see yellow. Yellow is the worst.
Yeah.
And there is way more yellow than anything else.
No, yeah, like collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's more yellow than any other color altogether.
Altogether. Yeah.
On that map right now.
Out is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's like 20 yellow ones.
Yep.
There's like 4 of the next color down, 2 of another color, and 1 of like they didn't find anything.
Yeah. 7 total of the other color completely. And then there are 20 yellow individually.
Yeah. So it's significant. And what I found interesting on this is that you've got areas down there like Providence Forge, and they're following the Chickahominy on a lot of this stuff.
Right.
But this river actually, this tributary actually goes all the way up and goes through Glen Allen.
Yeah, it's almost touching Goochland at that point.
Yeah, it's
just a little bit.
Kind of crazy. I didn't realize that it started up there in the Glen Allen area, or went through. It didn't start there, but yeah. So Glen Allen has a yellow dot right on it.
Wow,
that's comforting, and we have Highland Springs has some yellow, and then the rest of it, where they did most of their testing, is just nothing but bad.
So much yellow.
So much yellow. So disappointing.
It is.
Oh, horrific. So everybody's probably wondering, great, you've just ruined my weekend here. There is good news. The Kinetico K5, we've installed almost 9,000 of these in the last 5 years.
That's a lot.
That is a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, I can't really release a lot of details on it, but one of the reasons why we have installed so many of them is because that unit has been certified to protect people from PFAS. So you can protect your family, you can protect yourself, and you need to start immediately, because
that's very comforting.
Yeah. It is comforting.
Yeah.
That we do have a solution, because up until now it's all been doom and gloom, and it's around forever. If it gets in you, yes, it's going to be around forever.
Yeah.
Protect yourself right now for the rest of your life. And don't, whatever you do, don't go online and or Amazon, which is online, and try to pick up something that you just typed in that fixes PFAS.
No.
And I'm about out of time here, but I will tell you that we just 2 weeks ago, there was a story that was told about somebody that bought one of those online filters. And when you buy it online, there's no product support. There's no testing. There's no follow-up.
Right.
This customer put it on their home. Now remember, the EPA's max is 70 parts per trillion. We went down in there, put a whole system on the house. Coming out of our system, it was at 0, non-detect. In the house, they were registering over 400. We were scratching our heads going, what in the world's going on? Turns out they had bought a system online and put it under the house and didn't tell anybody. And nobody ever followed back up to see if it was working. And it started basically barfing up all the PFAS that it had temporarily grabbed a hold of. So this customer went from thinking they were protected to poisoning the entire family.
Oh my God.
You don't ever want, because you can't get rid of that stuff.
Right.
You don't want to find out, I've just been drinking 400 parts per trillion for who knows how long.
Right.
Yeah, that's bad. So if you're considering buying anything, at least call us, 877-60-WATER. We are officially running out of time here, but we wrapped up the one of the most impactful episodes ever, and we want to be your water partner for life. We'll see you in a couple weeks.